Hey everyone, welcome to our video about the carbon cycle. So we've already talked about the water cycle, and what we're going to do is talk about a couple of nutrient cycles. They help build up tissue and carry out some other life functions for living things. And the one we're going to talk about in this video is the carbon cycle. We could also talk about the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur cycles, but the focus of this one is carbon cycling. So take a look at this big overview of the carbon cycle, and you can see a couple things that you might have heard of before. So you've most likely, in this class in particular, heard of photosynthesis and respiration, and we'll talk a little bit more about how carbon is cycled through those processes. Last year in Earth Science, if you took Earth Science, you might have heard about volcanic activity releasing carbon dioxide. You might have also heard about fossil fuel formation or fossilization. And you may have heard a little bit about some human activity and how that impacts the carbon cycle in our atmosphere. So let's talk about how it works related to biology class specifically. So in biology, carbon is cycled in a couple of different ways. All throughout Earth, there are living animals, and animals that have skeletons or animals that are vertebrates have calcium carbonate, CaCO3. That Ca there is the chemical element calcium, and that exists in all bones of animals that have skeletons. So if you take a look there, you can see some examples of skeletons, but the large compound that is there is calcium carbonate, CaCO3. So think about when an animal dies. If its bones start to disintegrate or even are eaten by another organism, that's cycling carbon in our world. Carbon is also cycled as carbon dioxide in photosynthesis. So the plants, of course, take in carbon dioxide. You can see carbon here. That gets converted into sugar. The carbon is now part of the sugar molecule. And then that sugar molecule gets used during cellular respiration, where it gets converted back into being CO2. So carbon is then released into our atmosphere as a gas again. So in photosynthesis and respiration, carbon goes from a gas to a sugar, and then in respiration from a sugar to a gas. And so that cycles carbon over and over and over again in our on our planet. And if you think about it, it is technically possible that when you eat something right now, today, you could be eating a molecule of carbon that was eaten by a dinosaur millions of years ago. Kind of neat. All right. Carbon can also be cycled without the interaction of biology or without living things. That can happen in a geochemical way. So think about volcano eruptions you might have talked about last year. That volcanic eruption is going to release a lot of carbon into our atmosphere. And so that can certainly have global impacts and change the world. But it can be as simple as just erosion of rocks. Rocks that have carbon in them that are becoming eroded by water or wind or some other force are actually going to end up releasing a little bit of that carbon into the world and into our atmosphere that can end up coming into the carbon cycle. Now, you may have talked about this last year, you may not have talked about it as much, but fossil fuels, how does that happen? Basically, it's where biology meets earth science. So they kind of come together here. Basically, what happens is that a living organism like a tree or some animal or even bacteria potentially dies. Everything eventually dies. And what happens is that over an extended period of time, a long time, with pressures and heats added over that long period of time with heat and pressure, that living substance gets compacted and forms coal, or sometimes even petroleum oil. And that those things, coal and petroleum oil, are fossil fuels. So we think of them as non-renewable resources because it takes a really long time, a lot of pressure, and a lot of heat over time to turn a living thing into coal or petroleum oil that could be used to fuel neighborhoods and to fuel cars and things like that. It takes a long time for that to happen. So, some human activities have recently been having a pretty big impact on the carbon cycle. Some things that we're doing are mining. We're mining for coal a lot, and that exposes coal that ordinarily would have been trapped underground. It exposes it. And not only that, but we also are burning it and releasing it into our atmosphere, and that's causing the carbon cycle to speed up a lot. We're also burning fossil fuels like petroleum gas And the other thing that we're doing that's kind of impacting the carbon cycle is we're cutting and burning forests. So not only does that release carbon into the atmosphere as you burn wood, but also it reduces the amount of photosynthesis and respiration carbon cycling that could have been going on. All those human activities release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we've noticed that that can be pretty detrimental. So, as humans, we've been trying to find some alternatives to using fossil fuels, mining for coal, or cutting and burning forests. So, we are looking into different alternatives like electric cars, also getting electric energy from renewable resources like sun and wind and water. And so, we are trying to reduce our carbon footprint or reduce our impact on the carbon cycle. Thank you so much for listening.